President Trump could at some point be faced with the dilemma. Do you accept a quiet Chinese takeover of Taiwan like what they did in Hong Kong, or do you risk World War III? The United States is developing a deterrence strategy for the Taiwan Strait called Hellscape. We know this because Ampaparo talks about it to the Washington Post last summer with the very obvious intention of communicating to Beijing, we've got a plan for you. And that plan is to use air, sea, and undersea drones to sink Chinese vessels, which is quite a big move when you come to think about it. So Hellscape implies war. And all the war games I'm aware of, even the ones that the US comes out of ahead, are really large-scale conflicts in which a lot of ships get sunk, planes get shot down, missiles get fired, and people die. By actually letting Hellscape happen and having US naval assets sink Chinese ships. That's going to be the decisive moment of Donald Trump's presidency if it happens, because they're in the Situation Room. They will have to decide, is America going to stay number one in the Indo-Pacific but have to fight a war to do it? Or is it going to accept Chinese primacy, in which case the whole world reconfigures, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, and Beijing becomes the central hub? Potentially, there's a collision coming between China and the United States, because the CCP, under Xi Jinping's leadership, has made it really clear that the capstone achievement of his career is bringing Taiwan under the control of Beijing. And if you watch what's going on in the waters off Taiwan, looking back over the last couple of years, with every passing month, the PLA and the Navy do more and more aggressive things that worry the people running the Indo-Pacific Command for the United States. So the most precarious issue, the most contentious flashpoint in the world is not Ukraine, nor is it Israel, it's Taiwan. Because a Taiwan crisis would simultaneously be enormously destabilizing to the security system of the Indo-Pacific, but it would also be destabilizing to the world economy, because this would be a Cuban Missile Crisis, except the island in question this time is off the coast of China, not the United States, and they export GPUs, not cigars. In a famous chapter in John Bolton's memoir, he picks up the Sharpie and he says, "You see this Sharpie, John? This is Taiwan." And then he points to the desk and he says, "You see the desk? They're in the Oval Office. It's the Resolute desk." He said, "The desk is China." And Trump effectively said to Bolton, "Why would I send the US Navy across the ocean to fight a war over a Sharpie?" So the Chinese know that Trump is not really that into Taiwan. The Chinese know that Trump, wants to do a big, beautiful deal. And remember, Trump is Nixon. He wants to go to Beijing. He wants 1972 to happen. And for him to be the one who goes there and does the great, big, beautiful deal. If that's the case, and I'm Xi Jinping's advisor, I'm like, boss, this is your moment. Only now is there a president who could actually hand you this without a fight. But you've got to push the envelope. You've got to make your move.
I mean, I'm just digesting the scenario you presented, and it's a very difficult one for the US to work its way out of. You know, this sort of gradual restriction and then this declaration that is logically consistent with the notion of one China. And how do you find a reasonable response through that, especially as you say, given who's in the White House right now? I mean, it's a really tricky scenario, but it must be one that they've wargamed. They must have played this through.
So this is why Elon wanted to see the war plan, because it's really quite important to know what the US move would be. Now, I don't know, although I could get added to a Signal chat group later today that might tell me, but assuming that doesn't happen, I can only draw inferences from what's not classified.
How do you imagine this settling down and equilibrating over time?
Well, I'm not sure you necessarily do get an equilibrium under these circumstances. After all, what happened in the 20th century was that rival power blocks or empires ended up in two massive conflagrations. It was not a self-equilibrating system, was it? And the danger of unraveling what we call the liberal international order, a phrase that I don't like any more than the Holy Roman Empire. It was like the Holy Roman Empire, which Voltaire said was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. The liberal international order wasn't really very liberal, wasn't very international, and wasn't very orderly. But anyway, there was a system that essentially relied on US predominance. The best way of thinking about it, I did a book called Colossus on this, was it's just an American empire, an all but name. And the United States performs these unusual functions, but it essentially projects military power. It has complete military ascendancy. It has the reserve currency, and it runs an international system where it buys, it's the consumer of first and last resort, and it sells claims on the US Treasury to finance it. And this was the international order that emerged during the Cold War, triumphed in the 1990s, and has persisted really down until the great Trump backlash. And this raises the question that you've posed, what comes next? Well, I think read George Orwell. Don't overthink this. We end up in a world where there are three, not two, but three nuclear superpowers. Remember, that's Orwell's vision. He saw this very early on. But it's taken until now for China to be a nuclear superpower. And that's different from being a nuclear power. Nuclear power is you got a couple of nuclear weapons, big deal. Nuclear superpower is you've got an absolute ton. You've got tons and tons of nuclear weapons. And China's getting there, and it soon will be there. So that's the world in which three nuclear superpowers are in a dominant position. Nobody can argue with them. And if they choose to have spheres of influence, then that's the world. It's the world of 1984. The danger of this is, as in the 20th century, that it's not stable and you end up with a conflict. And that's the thing that I regard as the biggest risk in all of this. The miscalculation, whether it's like the miscalculation the Germans made over Belgium in 1914 or the miscalculation that Hitler made about Britain and Poland in 1939, somebody miscalculates and then you end up with a conflict. And as we've seen already in Russia-Ukraine, it's easy to start a war, hard to stop one. So I think there's a risk that this system that is evolving here, which Gideon Rachman called the sort of age of empire, that this system is unstable as the last age of empires was. Now, key point, history is not a deterministic system, and we can't sit here and project with nice straight lines how we get from liberal international order to 1984 or World War III. There's a scenario in which Trump turns out to be a very stable genius, and it all works out much better than you or I expect. For example, the counterparties fold in the trade war. They just all fold, and we end up with Bob Lighthizer fairer trade. There's a scenario we underestimated Elon. He actually does fix the federal government, and it gets more efficient, and it costs less money. There's a scenario where the interest rates come down, and that actually ultimately delivers something meaningful to households. And the stock market only corrects a little, and then it's all the way back up because deregulation is real, etc. It's always a mistake to be too negative about the United States. One always has to remember its innate advantages over everybody else. You get to attract all the talent, give it money, it does amazing things. Elon is only one of many. And then the other side is like not that strong. What if the Russians just overdo it? What if the whole system that Putin's built is actually very fragile and can't withstand a ceasefire? That's often the way about wars. And then finally, China. China has these profound structural problems that aren't really fixable. Demographics, the debt dynamic. So although we can see it all going to hell, and public intellectuals get paid more when they say things are going to hell, there's a scenario in which it turns out better than most people expect because Trump gets lucky and the other side is actually quite weak. And that's the future that not many people are betting on at the moment.